What's good, y'all? What is good? Hope everybody is well. Shout out to you. Happy New Year. Hope everybody is doing their thing. We are broadcasting on a different night. So, my apologies. Last night I was having some work done here on the house, and it was way too loud just across the hallway. So, I knew I wasn't going to be able to do a show. But we are starting to get a slow trickle of people. So I hope people will catch this because I think it'll be an interesting one. What's up, BGS? Shout out. Thanks for coming through. Tim, what's going on? I think we got a good one tonight that I will get into in a quick moment. In the meantime, let me first start by saying welcome to the Onyx Report, where we as Black male justice advocates uplift Black men and boys using critical analysis. And we're going to delve more into that tonight. What's up, JJ? What's up, Freddie? Cameron, what's going on? So we got people coming through. And yeah, this is a good one. So anyway, let me first start by thanking my subscribers. And if you're interested in supporting the show, please subscribe. Right? You can do that right here on YouTube. Go ahead and click the subscribe button right next to the join button. And I hope you will entertain joining and becoming a member of the Onyx Report. You can do that right here on YouTube as well. Click that, and there are options for what type of support you can engage in. You can also support through Patreon. The information is right there on the screen, how to find the Patreon. And you go ahead and support the show that way, as well as support the Institute for Black Male Studies. So check those out and support as you so choose. We appreciate it. In the meantime, shout out to my subscribers. Here we go. So thanks again to my subscribers. I hope you guys will, for those of you who aren't, will take some initiative to do so. Like the video, please. Share, subscribe, join, and donate so we can build the channel. I'm coming off my little winter break vacation, kind of trying to get back in the zone. So I'll be getting back to my daily videos quite soon. So please support the channel so we can do that. Yeah, let me see. So there's one quick thing I want to jump into, excuse me, before we delve into the subject. And we're going to delve in a little quicker than usual for my channel because I actually have two special guests tonight. And we're gonna be covering a topic that I introduced last week, a concept that I introduced, and we're going to be coming at it from two very different standpoints. So I hope you will participate in that. In the meantime, very quickly, I do want to acknowledge something that jumped off this week. Oh man, yeah, I closed the link. Let me open it up. I had it on the screen. I think I cleared it off by accident, but it won't take too long to pull it back up because I just want to shout something out real quick. Let me see where to go. Bop, 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 bop. Come on. Just got through watching. Appreciate that support, Tim. Thank you. Black men for hashtag Black men first. I ain't mad about that. That's real. BM1. Just got through watching Sidney Poitier and Bill Cosby and Let's Do It Again. Had to go back, watch one of the flicks I grew up on. So I was laughing at that earlier. And your boy just got kind of walk-in tub installed. So I will be spending quite a bit of time in there starting tonight. And I might even bring in a pillow and a blanket in that bad boy. So if y'all hear a brother drown, you know why. Because I'm about to relax for real. Anyway, what we do here on the Onyx Report is, alongside dealing with the negatives about Black male life, the state of affairs for Black men, even Black male vulnerability, one of the things we also do is celebrate Black men and boys and their achievement. And we frame this in terms of hashtag SacredBlackMasculine. That is a series that I pretty much do weekly. Appreciate that, Durante. Thank you. I pretty much do these weekly, but it's organic. It depends on how things cross my desk. So for today, what I want to acknowledge is something that is pretty amazing. This gentleman right here, you can find this article on patch.com. It is dated last year, and I don't know if I acknowledged him before, but I still wanted to do so, even if I have, just because this is the kind of thing I like to support. This is a young 13-year-old brother who began at Georgia Tech Aerospace Engineering Program. So he's 13-year-old Caleb Anderson, started this past fall as the youngest student enrolled at Georgia Tech. All right, this is in Atlanta. Among the thousands of students to start school Monday at Georgia Tech, this is dated in August of 2021. For the first time was 13-year-old Caleb Anderson. The gifted aerospace engineering major began this semester as a sophomore, years after wowing his family by reading the United States Constitution at age 2 and starting high school when he was only 10. As colleges and universities recruiting and admissions officials across the country came to learn of Anderson's brilliance, he had but one place he wanted to be in college. That dream was realized Monday when he stepped into his first Georgia Tech class. He says, "This is the kind of school I've been wanting to go to for a very long time, and I'm finally here." As the youngest student on campus, Anderson's parents, Kobe and Claire Anderson, were there Monday to offer support and bear witness to their teenage son taking this remarkable step. As they watched him, they beamed with pride while balancing both worry and reassurance. This is an article, as I said, on patch.com. It's entitled 13-Year-Old Begins Georgia Tech Aerospace Engineering Program. Shout out to Caleb. Congratulations, young man. That's the kind of example we definitely want our kids to see, straight up. So I'm proud of them. But as I told you, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time getting into the groove. We only got 49 right now, so I'm hoping some more people trickle in. A lot of people might have to catch this on the replay because this is not my normal night. And I'm not sure YouTube really put up most of the advertisement for this. But last week, I introduced the concept and talked at length about it. Had a great discussion with a couple of good brothers, most particularly Keep It 100, who's here in the chat. Y'all support his channel. What's up, man? I hope Marcus as well. And BGS. And we talked about what I call male relationship emotional labor. And I went into some description about what that is. And let me reintroduce you. Basically, what it refers to is it provides myriad forms of emotional security to varying degrees for women in general, be it intimately, publicly, socially, institutionally, and or politically in terms of policy. It is a hidden relationship expectation alongside money, sex appeal, sexual performance, and Black male gynocentric servitude. It is the masculine counterpart to the socially expected female gender role of providing nurturing and support in relationships. It is our most sought after resource as it is part of our protection dynamic, despite that it's often not acknowledged by women or men publicly. So what does all that mean? Well, in a nutshell, it just basically means that the role we play to sacrifice ourselves to protect women in particular in regard to relationships, and most particularly their emotional well-being, is a sacrifice that we are often not given credit for. And it is also the measure by which we may find ourselves out of a relationship if we don't provide it, even though we've never been trained to. We're not acknowledged for doing so. It's virtually ignored. It's rarely mentioned. And yet men were coming forth in droves to tell me how they've experienced the expectation of providing emotional labor without training, without any outright conversation, but still measured against it. Now, what does that mean? It's kind of like if you were going to start at Georgia Tech, and yet when you got there, your entire grade was based off of how well you did in art class. You're going to Georgia Tech expecting to do engineering, but all of a sudden, your art grade determines whether or not you even get to graduate. That's kind of what men experience in regard to emotional labor. We're expected to do it. Nobody tells us how to. Nobody asks us to do it, but we can find ourselves graded by how well we do it, even though it's not been formally introduced as an expectation. And so, as you guys can see in last week's show, men came forward to talk about the ways in which they experience these expectations despite a lack of acknowledgement for even doing so. So tonight I'm going to bring on two people. For the first half of the show, we're going to talk to Brother Sarah. He's been on my show before. I've been on his. Very good brother who deals with relationship counseling. I'm going to let him introduce himself to you. And then later in the broadcast, we're going to bring on attorney Dennis Spurling, and we're going to talk about male relationship emotional labor from an entirely different standpoint. So let me bring on the good brother. What's up, man?
What's up, brother Hasan? Doing fantastic, brother. Thank you for inviting me to the show.
Oh man, thanks for coming. You and I spoke not long. Well, we spoke before and after my last show, and you had some thoughts and some concerns about emotional labor that I really wanted to get out. What's up, Green Gorilla? We got Green Gorilla in here. Brother Ian, as usual, appreciate the work, Ian. Brother Malika, see you in here. So we're getting our full house in here. But introduce yourself, please, or reintroduce yourself, and talk a little bit about your response to this issue of emotional labor.
Okay. So the first thing that I do is I'm a spiritual teacher and counselor. My objective in spiritual teaching is to show people how spirituality helps us to get to know ourselves, to understand ourselves.
Okay.
From a relationship counseling standpoint, I do that from the spiritual aspect to basically demonstrate how relationships are an extension of the process of coming to know oneself. Because in a relationship, the relationship partner is a mirror which exposes and brings to light the issues that we have that we were not aware of that invariably come up when we're engaging with someone in a relationship.
Okay.
That said, it's the responsibility of the individual to recognize the issues that each of us have individually.
Okay.
Not pointing out the other's issues, but to identify one's own issues and then commit to doing the work to overcome those issues.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talked about the show after the last show, you talked about the imposed responsibility that men have for being caretakers of the emotions of women.
Yes, absolutely. Being emotional anchors, all of that. Yes. Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I was agreeing with you. Please continue.
Right. So I took exception to that point because it is not any individual's responsibility to be caretakers of anyone's emotions.
Mm-hmm.
We can support them.
Mm-hmm.
We can be soundboards, but it's not someone else's emotions are not our responsibility.
Now, see, this is interesting because two things at the very least occurred when I started talking about this. First, like I said, men came forward talking about the ways they've been pressured, measured, graded, and even dropped based on how well they performed this emotional labor. But then I also had, and I didn't expect this, I had a number of women, particularly on Twitter, that were celebrating the idea and were trying to say, oh, well, we would appreciate that. I would support that if my man did that more. And of course, I even had a couple that came forward and said, you know what, my husband has been doing this, and I actually never thought about the fact that he's been doing this, and you just helped me appreciate him more. But you're saying this shouldn't be something that we should aspire to. Talk a little bit about the pressure you've seen or experienced where men are expected to do these things, even though you're saying they shouldn't have to.
I'm sure every man can relate to having to deal with things such as having the expectation to read their minds, to know what they're thinking. And
yeah.
So you can relate to that. I can tell by the way you're laughing, right?
Oh, okay. She needs flowers. But yeah, that's what it is. Absolutely.
Right. And you might I think there's a Snickers commercial out right now, and I just saw it the other day. There's a Snickers commercial, and the brother comes into the room, and his woman is sitting on the couch, looking out the window, and he comes into the room.
I do remember.
And he says, "What's wrong?" And she looks at him, and she says, "Nothing." And then she cuts her eyes at him and looks back out the window. The brother knows he's in for it. He's in trouble because he's supposed to figure it out, and he's in trouble because he hasn't. So he's going back to have a Snickers because he knows that he's in for drama.
And that is a perfect description of an emotional labor. Like, she's requiring that he do some type of labor that he has to just divine and figure out what it is, and no guidance. But the measure of whether or not he's a good partner comes down to, in a lot of people's minds, especially the way women are socialized, comes down to how well he figures it out. Right?
Absolutely.
But you're saying it should go another way. What exactly should men do instead?
Okay, well, so there's a number of things. So that's one thing we just described, being able to intuit or divine, what was wrong, right? We're supposed to be good listeners, and listening is fine. We're supposed to give them comfort. We're supposed to make them happy, right? Okay, that's the primary thing that I take exception to, because one is no one's responsibility to make another person happy. Secondly, it's impossible to do so. So when I teach my relationship seminars, I point out that that is one of the primary problems in relationships, is the expectation that it is your partner who is responsible for making you happy.
Right.
In the paradigm of the society that we're brought up in, however, it's not a two-way street. Therefore, the happiness falls almost, I'd probably say 95% in the lap of the man who's responsible for making the woman happy. And again, as I pointed out, it's not a two-way street, because it's not even taking into consideration whether the woman is making the man happy. His happiness is his problem.
Exactly. Exactly. And you know what? One of the best examples of that is the holiday season. Routinely, I hear people talk about what men got people, kids, women, wives, what they got them for Christmas or whatever. I can't remember the last time I heard somebody talk about what gift a man got. I can't remember the last time, in terms of anything actually,
significant.
Significant. You know what I mean? I might hear it as a slight complaint. And I talked about this on Facebook right around Christmas. I was saying this is not something that I've had men, verbally upset about. I mean, many of us have just grown to accept that this is just the way it is. You're gonna get a $5 tie for Father's Day and for Christmas. That's the end of the discussion. But
Or
if we
some
take it,
socks.
or some socks. But if we take it deeper, what we're really saying is there is no social expectation that a woman prioritize even trying to make men happy, even though what you're saying is that it's not possible anyway, either way. But the onus is on men to do this impossible task, and we're measured based on how much we can achieve it. And she has no expectation, no social expectation to even attempt to do it.
Not at all. Not at all. So I'm sure that we don't have to go back far to come up with stories about women who have left their men because they didn't make them happy. There was just something was missing. They weren't doing what they were supposed to do. I'm finding someone else because he doesn't make me happy. He doesn't do it for me.
Right. And real quick, shout out to Art Newsel. Good to see you in here, man. Y'all support Art Newsel's channel. But go ahead, man. Please continue.
Yeah. So that's been socialized in society at large, that men's role is to make the woman happy. It's in the fairy tales.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's in commercials.
Yeah.
It's in the movies. It's in the love stories that women typically read. It's very perfectly characterized in the song that Anita Baker wrote, which is actually called Fairy Tales. And I encourage people to listen to the lyrics of that. But that's exactly what the situation is. So it's the expectations that are placed on in particular men, that it is their responsibility to make their women happy. That ends up being the root cause of why there's so much difficulty in being able to maintain a relationship. Yeah. And it seems to me that this is more acute in the Black community, where the expectation is the man is supposed to make the woman happy. Now, when I talk about how that ends up becoming an expectation, I describe it in my relationship seminars as being akin to being a drug addict, right? So someone initially starts taking a drug.
Yeah.
The first time they take that drug, they have the most significant effect from the drug. And that feeling will never be duplicated. But from that point on, they're seeking to attain that same level of euphoria that they got the first time that they took that drug. But the effect of the drug wears off over time to where it doesn't have the same effect as it had.
Right.
But the individual is always continually seeking to find that first high, to have that same effect. And so that's what causes the addiction. Similarly, when people have that expectation that love and happiness is going to come from someone else, they'll have that initial hit of euphoria, of happiness, that, like a drug, will never ever come again. But there's that expectation and hope that it will. We're looking for that same sense of euphoria. And so the effect wears off, just like with drugs. And so no matter what you do, you will never be able to bring that same feeling back again.
Yeah, it sounds like what my brother in the comments section, Broken Blade, he called it the Kobayashi Maru, the impossible scenario.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm familiar with that term.
Yeah.
So it's completely impossible. But, and so I'm sure a number of men can relate to feeling like they're running on the treadmill, chasing after something and never getting anywhere in their pursuit to try to make their woman happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My attorney Spurling actually refers to what I'm thinking about. He calls it a simp chip, something that we have been, programmed as Black men to have many since birth, especially if you're Gen X. And one of the difficulties is breaking out of those practices, those kind of knee jerk trained responses where your sole existence is about making women happy and breaking from that, and it can present itself in so many different ways. It's not even limited to just romantic partners. There's a brother in the comment section that said, I'm not sure, and I'm paraphrasing, said, I'm not sure what the first part, how the first part of this show is going to relate to me because I'm single. But I would say it's actually extremely important, because if you don't address the way we've been trained to think about relationships and our roles in them, you're gonna, it's very tempting to go back into that initial programming of just doing what you were taught, especially, if you were raised in a dynamic where you had majority female family members around you. You know, and this becomes important because goes back into this dynamic of relationships being this impossible task that only one person in the dynamic, usually male, does to please the other, even though it's impossible. And yet we know 1 out of 2 marriages end in divorce, and 70 to 80% of those divorces are initiated by women. So this idea about making someone happy has just shattered many of families, stability, coming down to this very philosophy. Any thoughts about the relationship between this type of emotional labor and families, being able to even form families if you don't engage it properly? Any thoughts about that?
Well, first off, I want to go back and broach something that you just brought up
Mm-hmm.
before you asked that question. One of the dynamics that you brought up, which ends up feeding into this cycle, is the fact that there are so many in the Black community, men and women, who've grown up in female headed households.
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent that that is the case, we're being brought up by a woman who is embittered because of her perception about her experience. And I said perception about her experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that bitterness often shows up in how they communicate to their children,
Okay.
both the girls and the boys. In the boys' case, however, it's is even they can even sense some resentment. And so because of the resentment that they have, and they're feeling that their man failed in making them happy, that the male child gets programmed with the idea that their father failed in making their mother happy.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order for them to be a good man,
Right.
they have to make sure that they exercise the utmost effort in trying to make their women happy. So to address the comment that your caller had, being a single man, it's extremely important that he have a different paradigm going into being in a relationship. Because if he goes into a relationship with the perception that it's his responsibility to make his woman happy, that relationship is going to inevitably fail because he cannot do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so what's important then is that when men are approaching and dating women, that needs to be a screening tool. So when we hear someone discussing if you hear them talking about things like blaming other people for their feelings, being victimized in the past, people made them mad, people made them upset, those are red flags, because it's a sign that they're not taking responsibility for their own emotions. They're not taking responsibility for their own position in life, that they're blaming. And so if that is the type of dialogue that you're engaging with a woman, that's a harbinger of what's going to happen when you get into a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Because all that blaming and victimization is going to be focused on you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Whatever negative emotion she's feeling will be your fault. And in order for it to be changed, it's your responsibility to change it.
Right.
You can't make them happy. You can't change their emotional state.
Mm-hmm.
But so having that expectation is just setting oneself up for failure.
Yeah.
If you accept that.
And I've seen this with, married couples that have 2, 3, 4 kids, and she's leaving him because he doesn't make her quote unquote happy, but she's now going to go find someone else who's going to make her happy. Meanwhile, how the kids respond to this, what it does to him, none of that matters. It all comes down to her not being happy. And the reason is he failed at figuring out how to do it. And yet nobody ever seems to be able to come after him and do it. You know what I mean? At least not for any extensive period of time. What are your thoughts about that? When you see families breaking up over this idea?
Well, what that brings to mind is a high level of selfishness, where the only consideration is her feelings. She's not considering the feelings of her husband. Obviously, she hasn't taken into any consideration about what she's doing to make him happy, and whether or not to make him happy, because that's impossible, but to do the things that he likes, that he wants, because everyone has wants and needs and preferences and things like that. And so you naturally want to do things that are pleasing to your mate, but also realize that they're not going to make them happy.
Right.
Okay. So usually the discussion about those things, this is what I want, this is what I want. Too often it's one-sided, just focused on what it is that she wants. Okay. And so if you're a man in this situation and you're just spinning your wheels, running on that treadmill, one, you're getting frustrated because no matter what you do, you're not achieving that objective. Secondly, after some time, you're going to start to become resentful because you've exerted all this effort and there's nothing coming back to you.
Check this out. Now, first, let me shout out Cedric for the Cash App. Appreciate that. KMK, appreciate that. Broken Blade, appreciate that. Here's an interesting one, and I appreciate Orange Pill Nurse for the donation. But check this out. He says, when I got married at my wedding, family on both sides made remarks directing their statements to making and he says this in the next post, my wife happy, and that they would get me if I don't.
Mm-hmm.
No one did say anything about what she should do for me. And I remember those same experiences when I got married. Everything was really centered around what made her happy. And that even leading up to the marriage. I mean, I don't care if you're talking about getting a dress or renting a place to have the wedding, everything they would sell to her, and they would only talk to me when it came time to pay for it. Right. So everything is geared around that. But like he's saying, even when you get to the wedding itself, it's still geared around making her happy. And I
Well,
would
look, man, I'll even take that further into my own personal experience.
Mhm.
My mother's family kidnapped me and my sister and took my mother, me and my sister to Virginia from my father. Kidnapped us from our father because she basically told them that he wasn't making her happy. So
didn't matter.
It's not necessarily an idle threat, but that is the expectation. But see, what never comes into consideration is, well, this is a relationship. So two people are relating to each other. Right. So what's happening is not happening in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. Okay. If a man is not getting the things that he wants,
right,
that's going to end up affecting his behavior.
Right.
He's not going to want to do those things as much anymore. One, because it's not making any difference. Two, there's nothing coming back.
Yeah.
You know, the universe is about karma. You know, and so you get what you give.
Right. Well, I can say, well, two things. One, backtracking a little bit, what I was going to say earlier is that in my own family, one of the things I noticed is the women in my family would actually, when I was newly married, they would call my wife to see how I was carrying myself. So I've never been married before. You know, I thought I would, hey, how's marriage going? No, they would call my wife to see how I was behaving. Was I making her happy?
So this, and you said this is your family making these calls?
My family, yes.
Check.
So her family is letting me know, hey, this is what you gotta do, which I understood. But I was tripped out to see my family would even do it. So this is something that comes from all kinds of directions.
Well, yeah, but okay, but it's your family asking how you're doing. Your family is supposed to be advocating for you, right?
No, they prioritize her feelings as well. Yes, yeah.
Okay, but what's the dynamics in your family there, though?
Well, predominantly women.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And you can see how that's reinforced on both sides in that way, in terms of how it actually shapes our thinking around the very idea of what a relationship is.
Right.
Because going back to what we were saying earlier in terms of, being raised with single mothers, they really, in many situations, condition young men to be the men that they always wanted. They condition their sons to be the men they always wanted.
Absolutely.
And pass you off to who you get with. But the focus is still on, how does your presence please her? What does it do for her? So you still have that kind of framework in place.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true.
And those are some of the things that we have to actually be able to think differently about. And I'll give you another example as well, because when we talk about relationships, just as we're doing, we also have to bring in upbringing and family, right? So this is something that happened very recently, I'd say in the last week. This is rapper Jim Jones. Not sure if you had a chance to see this, but he was doing an interview, and that is his mother pictured next to him, and he talked about the way he learned how to tongue kiss. And initially he said his mother showed him by example, and by example, she didn't kiss somebody else. She actually tongue kissed him as a young man. Later he tried to clean it up and say, no, that's not what I meant, blah, blah, blah. But you don't say that kind of thing accidentally. That's not something that comes out of the average person, let alone a celebrity. So I don't buy the cleanup. But the reason I bring this up is because when we talk about emotional labor, especially for men, the job of providing that labor, particularly to women, because you provide emotional labor for a lot of people. We provide it for our children, grandparents, you name it, grandchildren. It is part of the human dynamic. But particularly in terms of men and women, for Black men especially, we learn to provide this early in life. And often it is to mothers. Now, this isn't about his desires and
Hmm.
his wants and his thoughts. This was about hers. She was the adult in the dynamic. This was something she imposed on a young, vulnerable boy. So much so that even when he told this story, he didn't present it as an abuse that he experienced. He presented it as a matter of fact, kind of thing. Like, my mom taught me how to wash the dishes kind of thing. That was the way he kind of introduced this experience. And I think he was even shocked at the blowback he got from people when people were saying, wait, that's problematic. But
Well, I think what's significant about the fact that it didn't register to him that this was a problem.
mm-hmm.
I think what that points to the fact is that it's commonplace.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So in the generation that he came up, and I would suggest that in prior generations, this was not uncommon, which is why he was so comfortable in being able to discuss it like that. And so he was taken aback by the reaction because, from his standpoint, this was normal.
Yeah.
And I can't say that I'm surprised by it because I'm very sure that it happened in my family. And I heard of it in other people's families where if it wasn't their mother, it was maybe an aunt or an older cousin who did that.
Right. Now, one of the things we know, especially if you look at Tommy Curry and Ebony Utley's paper, She Touched Me, which came out, I want to say over a year and a half ago, they did observe that, for Black males' sexual debut, or, just another way of saying when Black males lose their virginity, more often than not, they are losing it to older girls and women in a manner that I would actually call, um, uh, 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 how would I put it? It's alarming, and at the same time, it's damn near an epidemic. If you read She Touched Me and look at the data, it's damn near an epidemic. But it can be an epidemic because there's not a lot of pushback for sexually violating boys, especially by women. There is pushback when it comes to girls' vulnerability. So you have it happening on both sides, but only one side is really called out. But the reason I bring this up is not just to highlight on the vulnerability, which I think is important, but to ask the question, what kind of labor, emotional labor, are these boys being saddled with? See, that's the other question that nobody thinks about. It is important that we look at the vulnerability of boys and men, Black boys and men, but it's also important that we ask the question, what exactly is the emotional labor being put on young Black boys when it comes to sometimes grown women who are projecting onto these boys emotional needs that these boys are decades away from truly understanding in situations that they shouldn't have to be in, which I think prepares us for the kind of emotional labor we're expected to do later in life. But when it comes to boys, what are your thoughts about that in terms of these grown women's projections on them?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic because the women who are engaging in this behavior, they're selling it to them and giving themselves the rationale that they're doing the child a service,
Right.
teaching them how
Yes.
to
Yes.
engage with women. And so they justify it from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't really even come off as though they're doing anything for the woman, although, obviously they're getting something from it,
Mm-hmm.
but they've deceive the child into believing that they're being done a solid
Right.
by teaching them that.
Right.
And the women who are doing it are justifying it to themselves by appeasing their own conscience, by convincing themselves that they're doing them a favor.
Service, yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so now how it ends up manifesting itself in the child when he grows up, it could take a number of different manifestations. It could end up resulting in sex addiction.
Absolutely, sex addiction. Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things I talk about as well, and this is kind of touched on in Curry and Utley's paper as well. When you're violated at that young of an age, one of the things it does is it even reframes how you process pleasure, how you process the very thought and engagement of intimacy and interaction with a woman. So what those early experiences were, and sometimes it can take therapy to really reveal how it impacts you, but it often plays in a manner into how you even process what pleasure is. So you may find that certain things turn you on, certain things don't turn you on, and you may think it's just whatever, but it actually can stem from those early experiences, because the data shows us that boys experience the same type of emotional trauma as girls when it comes to those situations, but we're told to process it differently. Girls are told to process it in terms of being violated. Boys are told to process it in terms of what you described. You got some, you got yours. I mean, I've even had boys that I used to work with in programs who had been violated by grown women. And when they themselves tried to go to the police, this actually occurred in Philadelphia, tried to go to the police, they were told right there in the police station, "What are you talking about, kid? You got some. Get out of here. You got some." That's the way, that's the way they're told to process being violated, even by grown women, family members.
Mm-hmm. And then psychologically, it goes back to the topic of the being of, was it emotional support, emotional labor,
providing
because
labor, yeah.
what they were being sold is, this is what you need to do to please your woman, and I'm teaching you this so that you'll know what to do.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay. And so it's placing the burden still on the young boy at an early age, that part of his responsibility is to bring pleasure to women.
Yes. And I think you're hitting on something that's extremely key in terms of how we're socialized to process sexual pleasure in particular. In many ways, and I've gotten this from a lot of Black men, you have people that process sex as you would think, just from whatever they're experiencing, but we are uniquely socialized to process pleasure strictly in terms of how much pleasure we bring her. I posted a couple weeks ago some data that came out about how much time people actually have sex for. And you'd be surprised to know, or most people might be surprised to know, the average for how much time people spend actually having sex came somewhere between 3 and 10 minutes. When I was growing up in the 80s, the way we had experienced interactions with girls, particularly older women, and the way we as young men talked to each other, we didn't measure sexual prowess by minutes. We measured it by hours. This is how we were taught that sex should be. And it wasn't really, you were supposed to get yours based on how much she enjoyed hers, how loud she screamed, whatever she did, who she told, what she said about it. All of it was geared around your sense of manhood being framed around how much pleasure you could give her, not even how much pleasure you yourself felt. I can't tell you how many men would tell me stories about really whether they ejaculated or not necessarily enjoying anything in particular other than the fact that they could say, well, I pleasured her. And that was it. Any thoughts about processing pleasure? And because what you do, a lot of people may not know, you actually um, you work with people. People contact you. You provide how would you call it, counseling?
Mm-hmm.
You provide counseling. So from the men that you've counseled, have you seen this kind of processing of pleasure having been interrupted by these kinds of emotional labor type experiences? Have you seen that in the people you've worked with or in your research?
I would say that there's probably not any man that I haven't spoken to who haven't had this issue.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, there isn't any. You know, because of what we just talked about. That's been socialized into us. It's been socialized into men, that particularly black men, that is their responsibility to make their woman happy. And you know, and as we talked about before, one of the strong dynamics and unfortunate dynamics in the family is that in our families is that our families are largely matriarchal, and
Mm-hmm.
so that perception is being programmed into us at an early age.
Yes.
You know, and so then when we're talking about, you know, being tutored in sex by a family member, right? That reinforces that perception that it's our responsibility to give pleasure
Yeah.
to our woman. You know,
Right.
I can even recall when I was young, adolescent. You know, I would pick up my mom's cosmopolitan books to look for secrets that
Mm.
I could pick up. You know,
Mm.
to be able to please women.
Yeah.
You know, and but that was in, you know, that ended up being my approach. You know, that I made sure that, you know, just like you described, that, you know, she was satisfied, you know, before I even gave any consideration to, you know, to myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and so when I'm counseling men in dealing with relationships, one of the things that I always point out is that first, you know, we have to establish our own criteria about what we will accept and what we will not accept in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have to look for certain things in women and have some red flags that basically draw the line of demarcation so we can choose, you know, adequately. You know,
Yeah.
we can't
Yeah.
just accept anyone,
Yeah.
you know. And so, and if we do, we run the risk of being put on that treadmill and not gaining anything from the experience.
Yeah.
You know, it ends up just being a one-sided affair, and so either you give up on any hope of having a positive experience and basically um, become a vassal for your wife,
Mm. Mm.
or
Mm.
you look for someone who understands that is a relationship and that both of you are supposed to give and receive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But more often than not, the expectation is for us to give and for them to receive, period.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean,
And that's why now men aren't really that interested in getting married.
among among other things like the legal dynamic of it, but yeah.
Right. Which is what the segue into the next section, you know, and you know, I've given the analogy of the way relationships are perceived now. It's like a transaction,
Yeah.
right? Okay, a business deal. So imagine this. Okay, you're going into a business deal where you're being asked to uh, put up your income, put up your assets,
Right.
your house, all these things, your car, all your possessions. You're putting all these things up as collateral for the deal. Okay. And the other party puts up no collateral. All you get is the hope of having sex sometimes. They're not doing anything. They're not required to do anything.
Right.
Okay. But now, in addition to the fact that you've put up all the collateral, in order for this deal to be successful, you have to make her happy.
Right.
And if you fail in that impossible pursuit, you can be foreclosed on.
Right.
And lose your collateral. Okay. So if this is a business deal, would you enter into this transaction?
Exactly. And let's add to the impossibility of it. You're often talking about, when you talk about marriage, you're talking about something that often girls have been thinking about since they were damn near toddlers. Most of the young men that I've worked with or taught in my classes, they don't really start thinking about marriage until like adulthood. But you have girls who've been thinking about this since childhood. So the list of expectations go back to damn near being a toddler. And you're walking into this dynamic, and you have these expectations that no one has told you about. And in some of these cases, you have women that have been thinking about this for so long they can't even articulate how many expectations on a husband there'll be. And so what you often hear is men say, we were dating, everything was going well, we got married, and then I didn't understand who this woman was. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that once she got married, she had a whole nother part of her that kicked in that she's been creating since childhood and waiting on you to fulfill. And you thought you were marrying the woman you dated.
Right. And it's so deep that it's become an unconscious or a subconscious desire, to where if you were to ask a woman, who all of a sudden starts feeling pressure to get married, and as you pointed out, this is something that they've been dreaming about since they're child. They dreamed about their wedding day, and I'm sure they have a picture in their mind of how it's going to look, and they've already identified, how their life is going to look as being married. They've developed all these expectations. If you were to ask one of them, why do you want to get married? What do you think that you're going to get from it?
Right.
They will say, well, it'll make me happy.
Right. Yeah.
But if you ask them why do you think that? You'll get blank.
Yeah, there's no answer for it.
There'll be no answer.
Yeah.
Because they've been programmed into thinking that.
Yeah. And the programming works for them because even when they're disappointed, as you pointed out, they can still extract resources from you while punishing you for not being what they dreamed about. They can punish you for not being what they dreamed about.
Exactly.
While we are trained to pedestalize, prioritize, anticipate, even telepathically what it is she may ever need, the moment you fall short of her expectations, which are already impossible. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Hasan, I want our connection to be so deep that you could just read my mind and know what I want. You should be able to do that.
I told a story last week when I introduced emotional labor, and I talked about the ways that I did that from my wife. And I think people process that, particularly some of the women that read it. they processed that as me saying I'm a good man because I can do it. And I think what people missed was I was actually saying that kind of impossible shit damn near drove me crazy. It damn near drove me crazy. And when I think about how impossible that is, it's even more so. We had a post that I want, a comment that I think might be useful to this conversation. This is from Sleeping Olmex, and he said, "As a single father, I had issues with family, women undermining my authority under the pretense I'm a man and don't understand my daughter. They had no answer when I asked about single mothers and sons." So it's okay for single mothers to define what the emotional labor role that young boys are supposed to play. But when you have fathers raising daughters, there's all kinds of questions about what he should teach her, what he shouldn't teach her, what the limits are, what she, all of this around that in ways that we don't do for single mothers and sons. Any thoughts about that?
Well, that's an interesting point. And yeah, I mean, I have thoughts about it. For one, it's a sense of arrogance in thinking that as a woman, you know what it takes to raise a child,
right?
A male child. But even just having the perception that the perception that any one parent can serve both roles, the male and the female role, whether it be a male or a female, that's a really high level of arrogance and selfishness, because you're not looking at the needs of the child. A woman cannot give what a man can give to daughter or son. Okay. There are certain roles that I don't care about what we're in new age or whatever. There are certain things that men can do, and there are things that women can do. Women are nurturers. Men provide stability, strength, physically and emotionally. Okay. And so it's about balance. Okay. And so in our community, if we go back into antiquity, we see that there was balance between the male and the female, the masculine and the feminine. I was just in Egypt this summer. You would see statues of the male and the female next to each other, equal size. That is a symbol of balance, of Ma'at. Okay. So we need both energies.
Right.
Okay. And so a male father, single, he knows that he can't be a mother. So most of the fathers, single fathers that I know of, they will look for someone, maybe a female in the family, or will look for a woman to be able to provide that type of feminine perspective to help with the raising of their daughter.
Right.
Because we recognize we can't give the feminine. But unfortunately, too often, our women, Black women, have been so negatively indoctrinated about Black men that they don't want to acknowledge the fact that the child also needs the male influence, and they will selfishly take it upon themselves to solely be the influence and parent for that child, and not giving appropriate respect for the male
Right.
influence that a child needs, whether it's a male or female.
Oh, and take it a step further, you get to Father's Day and Mother's Day, twice a year, you'll see women in that position of being single mothers demanding credit for being father and mother. I never see single fathers do that. I never see single fathers show up on Mother's Day saying, I'm a mother too. I don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
But every year, we see Black women in particular celebrating being both father and mother. The respect for the masculine principle is not there.
It's not.
They believe they can exchange, that they can fulfill it because, I mean, it's just something we do. You know, we got it. We got male and female, we can handle it. And that's kind of the attitude when it comes to fathering. And when we look at the fallout of the family, particularly with kids, in regard to the absence of fathers, the incarceration rates, the various psychological and emotional disorders and issues that are, you know, data driven, you can find are often a product of not having fathers there. All of that will often get dismissed in casual conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And what we end up doing from there is lauding the mother principle, ignoring the father principle.
Absolutely.
And so now we're in an era where women are calling themselves goddesses and queens, and we think that this comes out of nowhere. No, it comes out of the worship of the mother. It comes out of this kind of idea that the mother can do no wrong and can do everything. And the father is really, and this is the key part, the father is irrelevant. He is conditional. He can be brought in and exchanged and replaced for another when necessary, if he does not make the mother happy. That's where we've gotten to. The disposability of the father principle, the masculine principle. And when we get into these gender discourses now that are very popular, there's a kind of there's this idea that the masculine is so, it's so dislodged from the biological that anybody can provide the masculine principle, right? So that's we've gotten to this extreme of the discourse where, everything is what it is. It's interchangeable, but usually only as it pertains to the masculine. Nobody calls the feminine interchangeable to the full extent. I mean, we do hear it to some extent when it comes to gay brothers and whether or not they can embrace the feminine, but you don't even see them being honored as the mother. This is something that we see reserved for manhood, particularly in the Black community, for Black men, for heterosexual Black men, and the idea of what role masculinity plays in relationships and in family. It's interchangeable, it's replaceable, it's disposable. When it comes to the feminine, there are some men that can get close to it, and they're kind of lauded for being able to do it, in terms of gay men in particular, and trans men, trans women. But when it comes to the female principle, the feminine principle, the mother principle, that's still the purview of women, and they need to be pedestalized for it. You have this kind of double standard that I see happening in terms of how, masculinity is even viewed. Are you seeing that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. We're in a time where there's an extreme backlash to patriarchy, and not to say that patriarchy has not presented a problem in the world. It has. But what has to be distinguished, particularly in the Black community, is that what has been prevalent in the dominant society has not been the dynamic in our community. Okay, and so I've had arguments with white women over that point,
right,
where they've assumed that feminism is necessary because women have been repressed globally, and so they just extrapolate that to assume that has been the dynamic in the Black community, when it has not.
Right.
But I'm like, I just picked up this book, Against White Feminism, written by Rafia Zakaria. And and so she points out the fact that the white feminist basically just does just that, assumes that the concerns of the white female pertain to all women.
Right. Right. The
And
famed
they
sister.
take this authoritarian view of it and impose their views on all women.
Right.
And unfortunately, in our community, it has been sold effectively and has been used as a tool to divide Black families, to divide the Black man and the Black woman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we see be affecting the dynamic between Black men and Black women, where in addition to the things that we've already discussed, now we're battling with this perception that in reaction to a perception that Black women have been suppressed by false perception that Black women have been suppressed by men, and they're reacting to it as if it was true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think at this point it's deeply ingrained. I mean, this is what some of the brothers on YouTube have framed around the color purpling of the Black community. This idea from the color purple has almost become historical in people's imagination. In a revisionist fashion, it's somehow become real. Even though, if you looked at statistically how many Black men in the early part of the 20th century were living like Mister, it'd be an infinitesimal group, but somehow it became so universal. I think it became standard. I mean, I know women all the way through their 60s and 70s that still hate Danny Glover, and Black men that look like him just because of that role. So this kind of powerful idea that this work of fiction can retroactively go back in time and become the standard of how Black masculinity is viewed by so many Black women is really deep to me, and it's become accepted.
Yeah, and I would suggest that movie was put out specifically for that purpose and has done an effective job in creating that very dynamic that you pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
Because it provided a fictional basis to assume that was historical. And so a lot of people, as you pointed out, look at the color purple as what the dynamics were in the Black community, when it was not like that at all. And like you pointed out, it was a very small percentage of it, but the perception of it has been so real because of the fact that it was in the movie theaters, and knowing how effective that medium is in programming people's consciousness, that now in the wake of that, we're experiencing that perception and fighting it as if it were true.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're a brother who is late to understanding these things, you're fighting a stereotype that you don't even know about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that's one of the difficulties behind this. Now, you do individual and relationship counseling. In relation to what we're talking about, have you noticed in counseling in general, even your experiences with it, have you noticed how few seem to be prepared to actually counsel men with a degree of respect? Have you seen that dynamic playing out? Is that one of the reasons that you got into this? Because you don't come at counseling the way many others have been trained to. Have you seen that break in terms of how men are viewed, even in marriages? When you have couples going to get relationship counseling, how do you see men being treated in that context?
Well, there's two perspectives that I have and two, experiences that I've had. So the first part of the experience is that my perception is that when a woman is in a relationship and seeks to go into counseling, that she's not seeking counseling for the relationship in order to be able to discern what the problem is, bring all the problems out into the open, and try to be able to solve them. That's not the objective. The objective is to find a lettered ally to blame the man for the problems in the relationship.
Right.
Okay. And to the extent that the counselors that they go to are women, there is the inclination to take the woman's side of it. And so then, the man ends up being blamed.
Right. Right.
Okay. And so then you have the other side of the coin where, and this has been part of my personal experience, is that the counselor is actually sincere, but since the woman is looking for an ally to blame, to what, an ally to agree with the fact that the man is the problem, and so it's like, okay, see, I told you it was you, right? Well, if they don't acquiesce to that and, recognize that, both have things that they need to correct, then the woman doesn't want to go to counseling anymore.
It sounds like something you may have experienced, sir.
Yes, I have had that experience. Definitely.
Somehow,
okay,
is no longer needed when the critique turns to her.
Right. So your service is no longer needed because you didn't do what I'm paying you for.
You were supposed to punish him. Yeah.
You're supposed to punish him, right? So now, the third part now is the reason I got into it is because, from my perspective, other people who do counseling are doing it from a very superficial standpoint. Okay. So as I pointed out at the outset, relationships are a means to assist one in their journey into understanding themselves. Okay. And so that's really the true value of a relationship, is that so we are invariably going to attract someone who is going to bring out to the forefront so that we can see it, the issues that we have, because if we're alone, it's like, you're walking around in your house all day and maybe you don't have any mirrors in your house. You could be looking like a hot mess, but thinking you're fine.
Right.
Because there's nothing to measure yourself against. Okay. But then, now you have mirrors in the house and you're walking around, now you can see yourself, unless you refuse to look in the mirror. Okay. So the relationship is like the mirror. Okay. So you can either blame the mirror, which is what most people do, or you can say, okay, this is why I reacted this way to this. Why is that? And then start doing some inner work to try to better understand. I like to use the word understand oneself. Right. But so most counselors don't go into that part of it. Don't go into it from a spiritual standpoint with the objective of exploring oneself. So the relationship, one, is a mirror to help one understand oneself and to go into depth into understanding why we react to things the way we do and root out the causes from them and then remove all those attachments that cause those reactions. Okay. And then as one engages in the awareness and introspection of being able to recognize those things, both people in the relationship then are compelled to take responsibility for doing the inner work and then have each other back and support each other in doing the introspection work. Okay. And so that's what I encourage people to do and take people down the path to doing, as opposed to like, okay, well, you did this and you did that, you did this and you did this to her, own up to it. Yeah, I did it. Okay, promise you won't do it anymore. Okay, I promise. Okay, well, you did this and you did this and you did that. This made her feel this way.
Right.
Promise you won't do it anymore. So that's what most people do, deal with in counseling, right? I take it deeper because I'm not saying that you made her feel this way or you made him feel this way, because your feelings are your responsibility, not hers, not his. No one made you mad. No one made you sad. You allowed that. You don't have to react that way.
Right.
Okay. And so my counseling is empowering, is letting you know that you don't have to be affected by this. And it's empowering from the standpoint that when you realize that you have control, you will be much more discerning about those who you allow into your space.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't go and see, that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about this in regard to emotional labor, because you're letting men in particular know that in terms of how they define what a relationship is, they are not required to play this role. And even if they were, it still couldn't work anyway. You can't make her happy. You can't make anybody happy. So there's a liberation there, especially for Black men. There's a liberation in knowing that you don't have to play this role that you've been told since childhood was your job. You don't have to do it.
You don't have to do it, nor should you do it if it is the expectation that it's your responsibility to make them happy. I mean, and when I talk about this from a spiritual standpoint, realize I've applied this, myself, and I've come to that realization. I had a situation where, it was I had a talk with an ex that wasn't an ex at the time, and she came back to me with a list of requirements about what I was supposed to do to make her happy. And I just said, I'm not going to do it, because it was a one-sided discussion. There was nothing about what she's going to do for me. Not that I expected her to do something to make me happy, but she wasn't. It was just a one-sided equation. She was talking about what she was going to do and how she would do things that I wanted her to do. It was all about what I was going to do for her. And so seeing that was what the situation that was going to be required for me to be in a relationship with her, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't want to be in a relationship with you. Because I have respect for myself. I want things. I have things that I want. I have things that I want from you or from a woman. right? And so a man has to be able to establish his criteria. These are, and so in a relationship, both people should be able to come to the table. Like, look, these are the things that I like, would you do these things for me? Okay. These are things I like. Would you do these things for me? And so in a relationship, you should want to do those things for each other, and it shouldn't be a requirement, but that ends up being the case more often than not, that it ends up being a requirement. It becomes an expectation,
a one-sided one at that.
Yeah. One-sided expectation. And expectations always lead to disappointment.
Right. So ideally, you if you're emotionally mature and you know that your emotions are your responsibility, and you actually can engage a woman that understands that as well, then the idea for you becomes, we can share, we can enjoy each other. And even though I don't expect you to make me happy and you don't expect me to make you happy, here are the things that I want in a relationship. These are the things I'm willing to do in regard to what you want. And we see if we can actually engage one another. But it's not coming from expectation. It's coming from a conscious, purposeful dialogue about what role we can play while being responsible and mature about our own emotional needs, not coming from the other person.
Exactly. So it ends up being more, where love is, I would give this definition of love. Love is where you do things for the person that you love because you want to. You want to do these things because they find these things pleasing. You want to give of them selflessly. You're not doing it because you want something back. You're doing it just because you know that your woman or man finds this pleasing, and you want them to receive that because you selflessly love them. Love is selfless, as opposed to, well, I'm going to do this for them, and then attach to it an expectation that, okay, well, since I did this for you, you must do this for me. Okay. So that's not selfless love. That's transactional love. And that's not love.
Okay.
And that's going to wear out. Okay. So the ideal thing is where each person in the relationship is like, hey, my woman, I know she says she likes this. Let me go do this for her. Not because you think that, well, if you don't, I'm going to catch hell. You're just doing it because she has no expectation. She wants it, and you do it because you know that's something that she wants. Conversely, she's doing the same thing for you. And so in that situation, both of you guys are getting what you want, but there's no expectations there. Therefore, there's no disappointment. There's no pressure. You're being able to experience each other and appreciate each other in the moment. When you have expectations, you're projecting out into the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not appreciating what they're doing, what they're doing right now.
Which is not only a liberatory kind of thing. I also find that if you transition from relationship to single or single to relationship, it's still a smooth transition, because if you hold to that philosophy, you're prioritizing and managing yourself, whether you're single or in a relationship. And it's the same process. Now, I want you to tell people how they can reach you, how they can, how they can watch more of you, or how they can even, engage some of your services.
Okay. There are a number of different ways now that you can reach out to me. The first and most effective way is to email me at my email, which is sa-ra at sa-ra.org. So that's my direct email.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just write to me and let me know what the issue is that you want to be counseled over or have to have discussions about. Soon my website will be up, and when when my website is up, you can go to my website, which is sa-ra.org, and you can choose whether it's relationship counseling or personal spiritual counseling, and you can sign up there. There's also a page where you can sign up for a free, I think it's half an hour consultation with me. And so again, that's sa-ra.org.
And tell them your YouTube channel
Uh,
and
my
the radio station Inner Light.
Okay, my YouTube channel is under my full Kemetic name, which is sa sa amin ma'atra at gmail.com. So that's sa.ra, excuse me, sa sa.amen dot maat.ra. That's my YouTube channel. And then on the first and third Tuesdays of every month, I do my show Journey into Self, which is the same name as my spiritual counseling program, Journey into Self, on innerlightradio.com, which is broadcast at 7 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Central time, and 7:30 p.m. Pacific time, 9:30 p.m. Central time, and 10:30 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming up, man. Thanks a lot, man.
Oh, absolutely, brother. Thank you for having me on.
All right, man. Have a good night.
What's up?
So y'all check out Sarah. You can check out his YouTube channel. You can check out his Inner Light show. You can, engage his services. But the core of that discussion was about the ways in which emotional labor relate to relationships. Now, my next guest reached out to me last week after we talked about this concept of male relationship emotional labor, and he had a different approach. He saw the value of it in a whole different, from a whole different tack. So let me bring in somebody that I think many of you on YouTube are well familiar with. What's up, Uncle D?
What's up? What's up, man? How you
doing,
doing, doctor?
I'm good, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, doctor. I'm actually doing a simulcast of this on my channel right now, so we can get the maximum exposure, because I think that this is a very important topic, and I'm honored to be here, and it's always, to be on the stage with you, it's always an honor,
So, and I still have brothers writing to me about the last 2 times you came up in here. When you were shutting it down, you were telling brothers how they can manage their way out of relationships that are not going well.
Right.
And so there was some interesting directives given in that. So people still reach out to me on that. But for those who may not know, and I don't think it's many, introduce yourself. Tell people what you do.
My name is Dennis Spurling. I'm an attorney. I've been licensed to practice law for 20 years. My specialty is complex civil litigation, which includes mass toxic torts. When things blow up, I get involved. That includes chemical plants. In addition to that, I'm one of the interim counsel on the CPAP litigation, which is a big honor. Out of all the thousands of lawyers involved in it, I'm one of 8 lawyers who's helping bring in or rein in the defendants on this Philips, the respirator that they had a recall back in April, and so a lot of people were affected by that. Yeah. And so I'm one of the attorneys. I've been flying back and forth from Pennsylvania, working with some great people in federal court on that, and a proud HBCU grad, Southern University Law Center, Grambling State University. And of course, I got my LLM from Tulane. So I got the Ivy League side, I got the HBCU side, state school, private school, I think my most important title is father.
There we go.
And specifically Black father. And I believe that's important because it gives me I got a dog in this hunt.
Right.
It's not that there's nowhere I can go. I can't run from the issues that Black men face. Why? Because my sons will have to grow up and bear that burden if I don't try to do something about it here. So I'm very interested. And so it's interesting how you and I kind of gravitated to each other because our content it has, I would say, the same objective, but it's you come, from the academy, and I'm a litigator, so I see things from a legal perspective, and also my background is in science. I got my bachelor's degree in biology. I was working towards my master's in biology and my PhD in environmental molecular toxicology and environmental policy, but I had to come back to practicing law. But science is still my first love. So either way, that's it. But man, I'm Uncle D to the homies, man. Also known as the Blizzard King, man. I'm ushering in the winter. Shout out to everybody, man. If y'all can hear me, hit the #1 button and give a big W for Dr. T. Hasan Johnson, because we're going in for the win. How about that?
Right. And make sure y'all support, like, share, subscribe, join, donate, do all of that. Support both channels, please. But we had a conversation last week.
Yeah.
I did my show and I was talking about this idea of male relationship emotional labor and the roles that we play. You had a very different take on it because it even though the potential for the concept can go a number of different ways, the focus was still dealing kind of with what men do in intimate relationships, maybe even the roles we play as sons, even as children, the emotional labor we perform for women, whether they're family members, whether they're lovers, wives, etc. But you had a different take on it. Tell us a little bit about what you were concerned with.
All right. So early last year, when I first arrived on the YouTube scene, I wanted to talk about the social contract. And when I say the social contract, that's the contract that exists between men and women to keep the society going. Of course, the dominant society has a social contract. And then Black people in the subculture, African American subculture, we have our own social contract. Now, of course, it mimics the dominant society. But here's the thing. The old social contract that existed between Black folks, the mating selection, there's a social contract. Who do you pick and choose? There was one thing before feminism, and now it's something else. As far as general race loyalty, there was one thing. There were certain terms that existed before segregation ended, and now there's something different. The roles that African American men and women played in the household. There were traditional roles that we kind of used to have, which mimicked the dominant society, but now they're different. And in addition to that, what we have to do now is examine how has the contract changed. Now, whether you want to go biblical or whether you want to go practical, men are expected to provide certain things on the interpersonal level. And typically we say what? Provision and protection, right? We say that. Somebody said my mic is low, so I'm gonna put the mic a little bit closer. Y'all see I updated. I got that high definition TV. All you brothers in the manosphere, since I spent the $400 for this, help me get this back, man. But is that better? Can you guys hear my sound better?
You're good.
You guys can hear me better. Hit the #1 button if you can hear me, guys. I hope you can hear me. Anyway, so now let's look at the interpersonal relationship between men and women. What are men expected to provide in a relationship?
Yeah,
protection and provision, right?
Right.
Now, I was originally looking at it as though provision was, food and sustenance. After our conversation, you helped me you referred to as protection. The emotional support that men supply is actually a protection.
Yeah.
So I mean that really set a light off. It put a light off in my head. Wow, but it still all fits in. But see, this is a component that is often overlooked in the relationship, but it is a deal breaker when it comes to divorce.
Absolutely.
Think about that.
Absolutely.
I mean, my God. Oh, he wasn't there for me emotionally. He's cold. Blah. What do they say? This is a deal, but you got this guy who looks great on paper. He makes money, he takes care of his family, he's a provider, he's a protector. And because she says he's emotionally cold, this is grounds for divorce. Are you kidding me?
Right.
How could we have overlooked this?
That's not even how men are trained. We're not trained to do that. There was a shift, and I'll be brief with this, but we all saw, if anybody saw Fences, right? If you saw Fences with Denzel, or if you saw it on stage, that character, Troy, represented masculinity before the 1970s. Right. There was no expectation that he'd be there for you emotionally, and that he do. No, the expectations placed on Black men were protect and provide. That's why the classical scene everybody trips out on is when he tells his son, I don't have to like you. Right. My responsibility is to take care of you and prepare you for the world. After the 1980s, you get this whole other narrative about men being emotionally present, being willing to cry, X, Y, and Z, and all these different things. But what nobody wants to talk about is that women subtly punish men who are emotionally expressive. Right. Even to this day, I've been hearing it from the 80s to now. How her behavior changed the moment she saw you crying. It can be over the death of your mother or your father. It can be something that is, significantly serious. And men will talk about her whole demeanor change. She lost respect. And that was the beginning of the end of the relationship. But I didn't want to interrupt. But I just wanted to add that. No. That definitely lays the context. And so, where I'm going with it. So now I have to look at that in the context of what does this look like on a macro level? And when I say macro, I mean, okay, we see how interpersonal relationships go as far as man and woman, him and her, them in the same room, two individuals. But what about the fact that now you got a social contract between a group of people, men and women, that's changed? Okay, so before, men were expected to provide certain things. As a group, you see a Black woman getting beat up, you're supposed to jump in. That's part of the social contract on a macro level. Yes. You see a Black woman struggling with kids, you're supposed to help out. You're supposed to console your sisters, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. Now, before, there was what? Submission and cooperation. But so the social contract has changed, and our lovely ladies, as I like to call them, and I mean lovely ladies, I don't mean anything else. I mean lovely ladies, right? I'm putting good vibes out there, And so because the social contract has changed and they're no longer obligated to do anything for it, they don't even have to smile at us if they don't want to. It's offensive. And so what does that mean? That means that what are the terms? All our lovely ladies are supposed to give us in exchange for our services, which includes that aspect, that protectionist aspect, that is sex and validation. That's it. That we're supposed to get as a group. They don't have to do that. That's on an individual level. Right? But what do they have to give us as a group? Nothing. And so now you have Black men saying, well, the terms have changed. We don't have to give you group protection, which we don't have to fight and die fighting white supremacy racism. As far as provision, we are expected to provide for them and the children that they fathered with other men, but we don't have to do that now. And on the emotional level, right, which is also known as the deal breaker, we don't have to do anything for them. And so what's happening now? Look what the women are doing now that the men are withdrawing that emotional support that we used to give them. That's where I'm going with it. Yeah. No, absolutely. I call it a one-way traditionalism, right? Where in one vein, you're still, just like we can go back to the 50s, the 40s, the 30s, you're still supposed to protect and provide not just your woman or daughter, but anyone you come into contact with. She could have a busted tire at the side of the freeway. It's expected that you stop and do these things. But in a relationship, it's this kind of traditional idea where you do this. But women, as you pointed out, after the introduction of feminism, they don't have to do anything. They can have your child or not. They can work full-time, part-time, not at all. They're never called, what is it we call men that refuse to work? Bums or there's a couple of new terms that slip my mind right now. they don't have any of that. They can choose any role they want or none at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's proper exchange for the still social, the still, it's the stable social expectation that men continue to play the same roles we've been playing for generations, while having added the new dimensions of emotional presence and, so on and so forth. The question then becomes, as you pointed out, if men start to respond to the environment by saying this one-way traditionalism does not benefit us, we don't get anything out of it, and I'm still playing the same role that her grandmother enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, men start to say, well, what are some new contracts I can entertain? What are some new engagements that I can look into? Because this is not feeding me. All I'm doing is pouring out.
Yeah. Now, one thing, what happens, and I don't think we've given an adequate explanation for what the emotional load is. And you gave a masterful explanation. You said that the emotional load was what? It's when you're in the movie theater with your wife, and this part that reminds her of something bad that happened to her as a child, or you talk through that part so she won't see it or she won't listen to it.
Yeah, I was actually explaining how, we had lost, all in all, we lost 3 pregnancies, and one of which she had to deliver. So think about a woman who's 6 months along, and you've had children, so even when the baby's in the womb, you got dreams, you got thoughts, you're wondering, 6 months, 6.5 months into it, the baby dies, and she has to deliver it, right? So we went through that, 3 separate times. And so what ended up happening is she became so understandably, it was understandable, but she became traumatized when she would see other women with children. So I had to develop this spider sense. If we were taking a walk and I saw a woman with a baby carriage, I'd have to turn us another way before she saw the woman. Otherwise, she might spend a couple days in bed depressed. You know what I mean? If we're watching a TV show or a movie and I see it going that way, I either change it or turn it off or distract her for a scene. And it got to be such that, it became, and I used this example when I talked about it, it became like a dance that I would lead. And she would trust me to lead it because she didn't want to have to rebuild herself from scratch every time she had a breakdown. So if I distracted her in the middle of the movie, she wouldn't be like, well, why are you asking now? She got to the point where she would go with the distraction because she trusted that I was pulling her from something that she couldn't handle. But I never thought of that as labor. It was just something I did because the situation was needed. And when I started to look at how men in society function, I realized that not only are men doing this in individual relationships, we're doing this on a larger path. I mean, when you talk about when you talk about welfare, when you talk about, these are various types of policy-based emotional labor. Yes, there is a material need addressed, but it's also a feeling of stability. And I think in our community, what that has spawned is a disdain for Black men, a misandry, because they don't see the need for it.
Doc, let me give them a prime example of Black men holding the emotional load on a group level. Okay. So Black American women have a weight problem. I think we have an obesity problem in the Black. I think we all can agree on that. But instead of Black men ignoring, instead of Black men stating that, they will ignore those facts to spare the effect that the truth will have on the feelings of Black American women. So we'll say, oh, it's okay, baby, you fine. You're 180 pounds, you 5'3", you're fine. We're bearing that emotional load because we're trying to spare her feelings. That's one example. Or what you have, and Black women are so used to Black men holding that load that when you do tell them about it, what will they say? They'll say, oh, you're hateful. You hate Black American women. They'll try to shame you. They'll do that. They'll try to do anything they can to make you stop that because they're not used to men in the Black community not sharing that emotional load.
Right.
And see, here's the thing, and if you don't mind me mentioning, Kevin Samuels is masterful at letting these women realize, I'm not going to carry your emotional load. You're average. you are overweight,
Yeah.
you have too many children for a man that will really that you want you. And so that's what he's doing. And we enjoy watching the carnage, especially black men, because that's something that we want to do. We want to not be able, we don't want to carry that emotional load anymore, especially since the contract has been breached. And we're talking macro level. That's a good, maybe you have another example you can use.
Well, no, I would just say this is how cold the game is. It's when you watch Kevin or other brothers on here that are doing that, it's not just that we're blown away and we're lit up at the fact that he's not carrying their emotional load. It's that we didn't realize that we've been carrying it. You know, when you've been carrying something so long, you forget you're even holding it. And at the same time, we've been bred carry it without being credited for having done so, for doing so. So whether you're a little boy holding performing emotional labor for mothers, you know what I mean, or aunts or whatever, or whether you're a grown man doing it. And here's the thing, I talk about the ways in which we have we have family structure in the Black community where the households are primarily female run, but they're connected. So grandmother's house, mother's house, aunt's house, cousin's house, daughter's house. They're damn near like spheres, but they're female led households in connection with one another. And in many instances, they will even share male resources, right? It can include sex, but it can be anything from repair work to sitting there and listening to them download. And women will even share their men with others as some type of resource. We have all of that going on. And for Black men, we've been socialized to do this for so long, we don't think anything of it. We don't think of it as a value. We don't think of it as a skill. We're not credited for doing it well, but we are punished if we don't do it well. And yet, at the same time, we're a resource that she can share. So how many times as fellas have you heard, well, my girlfriend needs you to go fix such and such in her house or fix her car or do whatever, or take her son or daughter to an event. You know what I mean? You're actually used as a form of resource that she can barter with her network, right? And this is the framework we're kind of talking about when we see how these families are structured and the way we're socialized. We're already doing emotional labor, but we're not told that we are, and we're damn sure not told that it's valuable, even though I would argue it's probably more valuable than any other form of provisioning we have.
I agree. They don't need anything else from us, Doc. Look, they can take care of themselves. They don't need our money. They don't need our protection. They can call 911. All that they can, the only thing that they can't get from these other groups of men on a macro level is for them to carry that emotional load. And you have a better term. I want to use your phraseology because it's distinct for our community. And I want to make sure that the audience has that particular phrase that you use. And can you give it to us, please?
Oh, let me put it up. Shout out to Ishmael. Appreciate that support. You talking about this one here?
That is it.
Male relationship, emotional labor. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Male relationship, emotional labor. So this is the term that I want you all to use because it's unique to the Black American community. Okay. It takes into account what we deal with in this particular society, in this particular subsect of society, and you should keep that in mind. See, here's the thing. Black women in social settings are so used to Black men ignoring facts and reality to spare them the effect that the truth will have on their feelings, or that when you don't do it, they holler hate, chauvinism, sexism. When you talk about things like, and here we go, I'm gonna give it to you. Their insecurities. When you bring up the meat, you bring up the weight, when you bring up the children, and you mentioned something earlier. Not only are they expected to share, they expect you as a man to bear. They share men in the fact that this man had the children, but that man's going to help me bear the burden for these children. So in that regard, they use you as a tool. They use you as a resource. But that's one of those things that falls under protection and provision. But emotional labor, my God, I don't think it's been touched, Doc. I don't think that we fully stretched the limits of the effect that's had. I want to bring up this. what you will find is that when some men begin to shed or demonstrate their unwillingness
Mm-hmm.
to share that emotional load, you have people who the brothers colloquially refer to as simps. There's some guys online, I won't mention them, but we'll call Steve Harvey. He's a simp. And what these men do is they begin to shame other men who refuse to carry the emotional load back in place. The women run to these types in an attempt to get some countervailing messaging. And the truth is, in my opinion, women don't really respect those men. They don't really see them as masculine. They actually want a masculine man who they respect to speak to them in a feminine and an emotional form. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. Shout out to Dr. CD too. I completely agree. I mean, I think it's definitely something that I think about it in terms of a restaurant. You ever walk in and see those signs that say we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone?
Yeah.
I want Black men to get to that point, because I think the way we've been socialized, we provide it off the jump. We provide it so fast we don't even process it. It's almost like getting a paycheck and a bill comes in and you just pay it. Right? You just pay it, even if you can't afford it. You ain't budgeted yet. You haven't done none of that. You don't even appreciate what you've earned. You just pay it. And I want men to actually step back and say, well, do I want to pay that bill?
Right.
Do I want to provide this type of labor? And I've been in situations where I've decided to withdraw it. I can walk away entirely, or I can engage in a relation of sorts with someone and just decide not to provide it. And you're so right when you say it's processed as hatred. It's processed as an attack. When you haven't attacked, you haven't called anybody out their name, you haven't accused them of anything. You just withdrew an emotional service that you decided not to give. And how dare you?
Yeah, I don't think they recognize that though, Doctor. I don't think they recognize that when we hold stuff, basically we're holding stuff in that we otherwise could say, that we would want to let off. We're protecting you from having a bad day, if you will. The same thing you were doing with your wife, when that part of the movie came on. And I don't think women in general appreciate it. And I don't think Black women as a whole appreciate the burden that Black men absorb on their behalf. The crap we take from them, the crap we take from the world, but specifically what they're throwing at us. For the past 60 years, if you look at your TV shows, the Oprah generation, the Color Purple generation, all these ladies, they've been dumping on us and we haven't said anything. Right. And so now over the past 10 years, because of the rise of social media, we've been able to express the fact that we're not willing to accept that emotional load anymore, and they don't like it. No. They don't like it at all.
Well, and I think it also, I mean, because we can. I was talking earlier about the sexual role that has been attached to Black men, right? Sexual expectation. You got women from all over the world that that know what Black men are associated with sexually. Right. And expect us to provide those services, because that's been the stereotype going back to the Mandingo, this idea of that. And we've learned to perform it in many respects. Right. So much so that we often forego our own needs to perform it. But one of the interesting things that also happens with this is that you have different groups of women that can appreciate what Black men do without thinking. Because others are. Now, I'm not saying performing this type of emotional labor is necessarily a good thing. I'm not saying it's bad or good, but I am saying it's ignored. And there are other groups that, from different places around the world, South America, Caribbean, the continent, there are different places, but these women actually can look at what Black men here do and identify the value of it in a way that we're not trained to. We're actually not trained to. I have a good brother, for example, full professor, one of the youngest full professors I've ever met. I think he became full in his mid-30s. Highly accomplished, intelligent, handsome brother. But because he was so accomplished intellectually, you can imagine how he was talked about from, you know, high school on in regard to women here. He met a woman from the continent. She took one look at him, one look. She said, "This man is handsome. He's accomplished. He's intelligent, and nobody is getting with him. If anything, he's ridiculed,
Right.
and being intellectually accomplished." He told me she snatched him up so fast he didn't know what was happening, and the intensity, you know, that she had about his value shocked him. Because he had never been affirmed in that manner. And in terms of the dynamic with women in America, he was, you know, he was what they call an educated lame. She looked at that and said, "Oh, y'all tripping. I got him." And the next thing he knew, he said, "I damn near married her on the strength of her attraction to me." You know, but that, you know, in that regard, the value of what Black men do here that we don't even think about is seen differently when people are socialized in different contexts. And you could probably speak to that far better than I could.
Well, yeah, and you know, it's interesting, and I actually talked about this in my broadcast last week after watching, you know, your work. So I talked earlier about the old social contract. So here's the new social contract, right? And and I'm talking specifically about the relationship that exists between Black men and Black women in exchange for sex with a Black woman or being in a relationship with a Black woman, right? This means an individual Black woman, right? You have certain requirements that you owe to the group, right?
Okay.
And in exchange for that, the group will then give you validation and attention. And they will, yeah, good boy, you're doing a good job.
Wow.
So what happens when you decide to date interracially?
Okay.
And you're no longer receiving your sex and attention from a member of the Black American female group, right? So what happens, right? What if you're supposed to give them, if one of their group, and I'm looking at, you know, I'm looking as a scientist, right? If you're not receiving your sex and your validation and your attention from them, right? What do you owe them as a group?
Okay.
Think about that. Like, what do you really owe? So, and if you begin to think about it, this might be why interracial sex is so looked down upon by Black women. If Black men is not receiving sex and validation and attention from a woman, or if he's receiving sex, validation, and attention from a woman or women of another group or racial group, he has no obligation to then provide protection, provision, or bear the emotional burden of Black American women based on the terms of the newly negotiated social contract. Think about that. Just think about that for a minute, because there's such a vitriolic response when Black men date out, whereas with Black women, because they're not obligated to really give us anything in the new social contract, they can do what they want to do, and you don't have an uproar from Black men. And Black women have nothing to say. So there has to be a better answer in that social enclave. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, here's the thing. The way I look at when I think about feminism, okay, I think about say, for example, I don't know, a knitted sweater.
Okay.
And feminism basically said, well, you know what? When it comes to women and girls, we want to take this strand and we want to just pull it out, and we want to prioritize it. We want to pull it out, and there was no thought to what that would do to the tapestry of the rest of the sweater. In other words, when men stepped back and said, well, if she's redefining herself, I'm standing here by myself holding to, as you said, the old social contract, then this frees me up to raise a whole new set of questions. And with that, you've had, now here's the thing, when you talk about the manosphere just gave names to shit that Black men have been doing for decades.
Right.
I know, I'm serious. You know, I know brothers in their 60s that started dating internationally decades ago, and they actually took the 70s definition of Blackness, which moved from strictly an African American context and moved it to an international one. So you have Black men that will tell you, I still only date Black women, but those Black women may come from, you know, Britain, they may come from Africa, they may come from the Caribbean, they may come from South America, you know, they may come from anywhere. And then you have some that are just completely like, I'll go with whoever extends me the proper amount of respect and care. You know, but the point is, we move from just an African American context to a larger one, But it didn't really start, in my assessment, until feminists pulled the tapestry, pulled the string out and said, well, we want something special just for us. And it doesn't work that way. As you said, it's a delicate exchange of resources, energy, social engagements, roles, gender roles at that. And if you're going to pull that tapestry and you're going to say, well, we want to be able to do whatever we want, and we want men to cater to whatever we want to do. If I want to have multiple, men, but you can't see other women, women will come in with this kind of narrative, and then turn around and be surprised when men respond and say, okay, well, if you're going to do that, we're going to have to figure out what we can do. And as Black men have started to explore in these last number of decades, now we're seeing the cost of that, because when you really look at the data, the only group that prioritizes American Black women are American Black men.
That's it. Yeah, that's it, Doc.
And if you're going to alienate the only group of men that prioritize you,
you're not going to have great results at all. And I keep going back to the social contract, and I'll put this in the private chat. The new terms of the soul, and this is something, and please pick it apart. Please pick it apart. But my thoughts are the new social contract. So what do we get? And it's because we don't get submission, we don't get cooperation, we don't get
contempt.
Yeah, we get contempt. So what do they give us? They give us the absolute minimum, and that breaks down to validation and attention. And what do they get in return? They get protection. But here's the protection that they get. This includes us laying down our lives for any one of them. They get a bad pedicure at the local Asian nail shop. We're supposed to go in there like gangbusters and hit everybody in there with brooms and bricks and like the Navy SEALs, the Negro SEALs, if you will. Like we go in there like the Negro SEALs, right? And provision includes taking care of their children fathered by other men. Okay, that's part of the new contract. This is not something that was, as prevalent in the contract that we had pre-1955, but now it's part of the obligation. Okay. And then I also added in the emotional support, which means their exclusion, right? Carrying their emotional load to the exclusion of other women from other races. And here's the kicker: certain classes of Black American women of our own race. What do I mean by that? If she's too light-skinned, if she's too light-skinned just because she's having a bad day, you're still not supposed to empathize with her. You're not supposed to come to her aid. I find that also very interesting. What are your thoughts on that, Doc?
Well, go into that a little bit more. Give us a scenario with that.
So I'm gonna adopt what you said, that the emotional load falls under protection. Okay, so you have a situation where if you see a woman, a Black woman, let's pick one. I don't know, somebody who's not sympathetic. Pick a Black woman who's married to a light-skinned Black woman married to a dark-skinned Black man. Let's say somebody that would otherwise be Black if they were married to a white man. Let's say a Jennifer Lopez, right? Let's pretend like she has some Black in there. Now she's married to a dark-skinned Black man. Oh no, she's not one of us. She's a foreigner. So something bad happens to her. So now you're not supposed to sympathize with her. You're not supposed to console her for what she's dealing with. And I'm sure there are better people that have African descent. I don't know if J-Lo actually claims her African descent. I know she's Puerto Rican, but that's kind of what I'm talking about in that context.
Okay. You're saying the brother that's with her, in order to stay in the good graces of the Black community, is not supposed to provide her emotional labor because she's light, or what is that? What you're saying? Because
she doesn't.
She doesn't represent the idea of the American Black woman.
She does not represent the idea of the Black American woman that needs the most, and that's typically the darker skin, darker complexion sisters, and even amongst the African American women, like I've noticed that they oftentimes will ostracize the lighter, fair-skinned women, especially if they have Eurocentric features, especially if they have that long curly hair. I see what happens with them. They get called all sorts of names. They get vilified, and it goes both ways. But the dominant society does most of the attacking on dark-skinned women. They make them out to be these brutes and these mammy types. It's real touchy, and I don't it would take a Black American woman to explain the dynamic of that, but I've seen it happen just as an outsider looking in.
Well, and there's so many dimensions to how we've seen these kind of things play out, because you can see it in terms of skin color. I've seen it in terms of hair texture,
right?
In terms of body shape, I've seen it in terms of class. I've seen it in terms of nationality, right? And especially if you're talking about international.
Right.
I've seen it in terms of age.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jay Jermaine for that support. I've seen it, but all of these different dimensions, these different divisions and dimensions play out in terms of what I hear you saying is the shaming of Black men and the attempt to control the amount of emotional labor men give to approved Black women. And that approved Black women seems to shift for whether you're talking about age, weight, hair texture, skin color, eye shape, body weight entirely, nationality. There are all these different dimensions, and who gets approved and who doesn't becomes a huge issue, because what tends to happen is, I think in many ways Black men are viewed kind of like if we were to talk about home ownership and you talked about the equity in your home, the home you own, who gets that equity?
Right.
Who gets to profit off of that Black male, and who should be able to get that and who shouldn't? And there seems to be a great deal of interest in making sure that Black men's resources in terms of that emotional labor, as well as the material, right, is tightly controlled. And when you start to, you don't even have to oppose it. When you just start to question, why should I play out what I'm being pressured to perform? Why don't I determine who I'm going to give that to based on how I feel about them in one respect, but also how they treat me? When you start to raise those questions, you see immediately an intense backlash against Black men who have decided to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to decide who I'm going to give my energy to.
Yeah.
And the irony is it could still be a Black woman and you'll still get it if it's not approved of in a very particular way, because there's so many different ways you can cut that cake up. I mean, and I may be misunderstanding what you're saying.
You're see, this thing is still, I haven't still wrapped my mind around it yet. I'm still talking to you publicly. This is a conversation that, when you're sitting in the teacher's lounge, or you're sitting in some laboratory somewhere, or in the library or some room, this is like a think tank conversation, because I'm really trying to get a better understanding of it. Here's another thing, since you mentioned that who you are allowed to give your who you're allowed to give your attention to, who you're allowed to carry, whose emotional load you're allowed to get. Think about a very fit, slender woman. She can be dark, light, whatever. But if you have, and especially if she's young, right? You got an under 25 or under 29-year-old woman who's slender and fit and well kept. You're going to be looked at, especially if you're in a room full of women who are obese, especially if she has natural hair, whether she's dark or light. And it's almost like they try to dictate whose emotional load we can carry. I just find the whole idea fascinating. Now, again, I'm looking at it on a macro level, because you don't have to go in a room and tell each and every one of those African-American women how to behave when you bring a woman who they don't find acceptable for you as a Black man to have. It's almost like on cue. They know how to look at her sideways. They know how to come up with the jokes. Girl, you dressed for the summer. Look at that man there with that young girl. She must be one of them OnlyFans girls or something like that.
But this is how nuanced it can be. Because when you described her, you described my wife.
Oh,
I remember when I first we first started to get serious, I introduced her to some female friends that I'd known for a long time. And between, there's about three of them. One was extremely light, one was extremely dark, one was in the middle. A couple of them were larger size, one was really thin. You had all these dimensions, right, among these women. They took one look at the woman I don't think I was engaged yet, but they took one look at her. And they now she was dark skinned, she was slender, she had natural hair, and she had a pretty smile.
Okay.
By all intents and purposes, she should have been acceptable. Right? She wasn't, because she was young, she was pretty, and she was fairly thin, and most of all, she had an uplifting disposition. The girl would smile at you at the moment she saw you, even if she didn't know you. I was surprised to find. Appreciate that, brutally honest. Welcome to the Onyx Brotherhood. I was surprised to find that they called her out, and they would make fun of her, and they would tell her, you're not a real sister because that's why, and they would come up with all of these different things. So I'm saying there are so many different dimensions where we see this, but the connecting fiber to all of this is who you give your energy to, and the extent to which you have a tradition in our community, in the gynarchy, what I refer to as the Black Gynopotestal family structure, where you're supposed to give your resources only to who's been approved by the network of women that you are owned by.
And I got a scenario for them that might, because a lot of ladies are going to be looking at it and they're not going to be he's talking about. So ladies, I want you to listen to me, and fellas, you listen to me too. So your boyfriend says he's sitting in the car, right? He's been there for like 20 minutes talking on the phone. You don't know who he's talking to, right? He likes to talk to his mother. He likes to talk to his sister, whatever. You're cool with that. Now you go knock on the window and say, hey, I need you to go to the store and get some eggs and some honey buns and some diapers. And who are you talking to? Come to find out, he's talking to a friend of his from school.
Okay.
Right? Or better yet, an ex-girlfriend who he's still cool with. Now he's not providing her any money. He's not providing her any protection. She's apparently father has just died, mother's just died, and he's basically bearing that emotional load. How many of you women would find that acceptable? Right? Probably little to none of you would find that acceptable, because you don't want him bearing her emotional load. That's not acceptable. I think that's an example of men bearing an emotional load when it's he's out of bounds. Basically, he's involved. You see what I'm saying with that?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Yeah, and so that is, or fellas, you wouldn't even dream about your phone rings and come to find out it's your baby mama and she's complaining about her new boyfriend cheating on her with some other guy, and your girlfriend is right there. Do you think that, how long does that phone call last? How uncomfortable are you talking to your ex-girlfriend who has your child, right? About what her new boyfriend did and broke her heart. You gonna have that conversation with your new girlfriend right there? No, you're not allowed to carry that emotional load, sir. You like, ooh, I'm gonna get back to playing these video games. I'll let you play.
It don't even need to go that far, man. I've been cussed out just because an ex texted me.
Right.
I didn't even know she was texting. She just texted, and I'm getting cussed out like I have some kind of affair going on.
Yeah. So when these ladies say, "Oh, you men are not there for us emotionally," oh, yes, we are. And on top of that, we're there for you emotionally, and you don't want us to be there for other women emotionally, unless it's maybe our mamas. But then what happens to men who carries their mother's emotional load too much? What do women, how do they shame you out of talking to you a mama's boy? You always up under her skirt. You need to break that. You need to be a real man. So you don't want us carrying the emotional load of our mothers. It's there, ladies. And that's just on an individual level. And like I said before, you get angry with black men when we start telling you stuff like, baby, you need to lose at least 120 pounds or grow 5 feet because you are heavily overweight. You expect us to hold that. You expect us to not say anything about it. So it's true. Don't try to dismiss this. Don't get mad. We know what's happening. But go ahead, doc.
She can tell you that you need to increase your income.
Oh, yeah.
You need to make over 100,000 more than you make. She can tell you that. Or she can tell. Look, I've seen it where on the first meeting, she can tell you, well, when we do get together, my money is my money and your money is our money.
Oh my!
The audacity of that.
Yes, Lord.
I've never seen a man say, well, here's how this is going to go. my penis is mine, and for whatever I want to use it for, and
Yeah.
you know, your parts are, you know, strictly for me. That dynamic in it, most men, that's not even a conversation you hear about being commonly had, but the reverse of it is far more acceptable. So
Yeah.
I'm you know, I'm trying to get brothers both individually and collectively to actually take stock of the resources that they liberally extend on a regular basis, because we've not been taught to appreciate what we extend. Actually take off. Now, I'm not saying don't provide it. I'm not saying don't engage. I'm saying you choose, but take stock. Step back and look at what you actually bring, and just assess. You know, and this is one of the things that in the last few years I've come to value, because we didn't have conversations about sexual marketplace value when I was.
No.
I never heard of the concept. You know what I mean? All I knew was, you know, as a teenager to a young adult, the only time women really paid attention to me is if there was a sexual role I could play in their life. But then when you cross 35, 40, all of a sudden you start getting different kinds of women coming at you with a whole different list of expectations.
Right.
And if you're successful in any measure, you're just like, well, what is this? Shout out to the Roger Report. Thanks for having you in here.
Shout out to Roger Report, man. What's happening, brother?
So the dynamic shifts, you know, and that's one of the things, you know, that I never expected, you know, because I still saw myself the same way at 35 that I saw myself at 17, but the social environment changed and what I could provide changed. And so all of a sudden the way women were approaching me changed. And nobody told me why or how. I picked up some elements, but I didn't have the full picture. So we start really looking at sexual marketplace value. I'm trying to tell men, you actually have a number of things that aren't even discussed that should be part of your assessment, your self-assessment. But you're interested in taking this in a more of a macro kind of framework, which is what
I want to, but I think it's important that the men understand on an individual level what they give. Because so let's try this. And you had a young man, Marcus Aurelius, and he gave a great scenario. He talked about a lady friend of his who called, and he said he basically had to sit on the phone and listen to her and cajole her, and that's okay, and I understand. And how does that make you feel? And and I understand. That is so emotionally draining.
Yes, it is.
And you don't even want to you want to lay down at that point. You know, you want to lay down and go to sleep after. You don't want to play video games, basketball, football. It's so emotionally draining. Fellas, you know that conversation that you have, and this, shout out to all the men who juggle multiple women. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you deal with those good morning text messages. And, hey, babies, I don't know how you remember all their names and their birthdays. Bro, I'm good with one woman. All these dudes talk about we need multiple wives to save the black community. Bruh, you on your own, bro. The one I got, I'm cool with. Okay, because I got other stuff I'm thinking about. And then I'm like, hey, baby, how you doing? Because I want to keep the cooking happening. You see what I'm saying? I've gotten used to having a woman cooking, and it's nice. And so in exchange for the cooking that I'm getting, and my lady will tell you, I love the cooking. Everything else, hey, you're beautiful, you're young. I like the cooking myself, because that's the only thing I can't get when I'm by myself is some good home cooked food. Uncle D is real simple. Feed me. I'm a big man. I like to eat. You cook good. We friends forever. And you got a good personality.
Right.
You funny. Oh hell, yeah. We gonna get married. That's why she got that big rock. But what I'm saying is, I don't think men appreciate what they're actually giving. No. It's draining. Women have to go to therapy. They think about the psychiatrists and the psychologists that need their own therapists because they're listening to other people dump that emotional load on them every day.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? And so until you guys recognize what you're actually having to do, it's hard for you to begin to change. It's hard for you to begin to say, hey, as a group now, this is what you're doing. Because they need to recognize on an individual level what they're doing first.
Right. And see, the other dimension I would add to that is I want to see men actually prioritize themselves, take care of themselves. Look, I got boys that'll tell you about the new car they bought, or the new trip they bought, trip they took or whatever, or the new clothes they bought or whatever. Let me tell you, I just bought a walk-in tub.
Yeah.
It just got installed. I ain't used it yet. We just finished installing it today. Do you understand when I get out of this show tonight, I'm about to sleep in that tub tonight. But my point though is that it had never dawned on me when I thought about things that I wanted in the world for years. It was things and I hadn't processed it this way, but it was things that were not only appealing to women, but in a low-key kind of way would benefit women, whether it was a car, a house, or whatever. It was always in service to appealing to women. I never really stepped out and said, you know what, I'm going to do this for me. I want Black men to know themselves well enough to say, you know what, I enjoy smoking cigars. I'm actually going to take X amount of time out, a week or a month, to go to a cigar shop and enjoy a cigar. I want to go, if I like taking a trip, especially to a certain country, and I just enjoy being there. It's not about appealing to other people or making it look good on social media. I want to go because I enjoy it. I want you to do it. If it's a bathtub, I don't care what it is, but I want us to be able to prioritize ourselves enough to actually make that part of the equation, because I don't think we know how to. I really don't.
I don't think so. And we owe it to ourselves. It's that one of those ways you can relax and dump that off. And men we're not typically allowed to distribute our emotional load to women. You can't go and tell your woman you had a hard day at the job. You can't tell them that your boss might fire you. You have to take it all in, which is probably why we die of stress.
Yes.
Probably why we have heart issues and those sort of things. So if you guys don't believe the emotional load is the real thing, go ask your doctor, about internalizing all those emotions, stress, and not letting it out. But the thing is, Doc, and I think now we've laid the foundation for that. We've established what the emotional load on an individual level, on a macro level. Like, what do you see? What do men in general carry as far as the emotional load for women in general? Greater society, subsect. What are your thoughts? You had about a week to think about it. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think we see it on a lot of different levels, man. I mentioned earlier, whether you were talking about welfare, whether you're talking about education, like one of the things we've seen in the last 50 years is this prioritization of women going to college. What we've seen in the last year, right, where we start to see these philanthropic organizations that are developing programs to train Black women. There's been no mention of Black men.
No.
We saw programs designated for helping people during the pandemic, helping small mom and pop businesses advance. They actually developed some for Black women. There was no mention of small entrepreneurial programs for Black men. There was none. I mean, so we provide this on a variety of levels, institutionally, in terms of policy, right? We have so many structures in place that we purely define this materially, but we don't often think about the emotional level that provides for on a societal basis. How comfortable does a woman feel when she knows if she's poor, she can get welfare, if she's middle class, she can get a college education and a white collar job? You know what I'm saying? Those are resources that are set for her. For Black women, if you lose your job, look, I'll put it to you this way: I've never met a brother that couldn't easily think of the couple of things that would need to happen to send him sleeping under a bridge. Every man that I've ever met and had this conversation with can tell you in 2 steps what can happen that would have him sleeping under a bridge somewhere.
Yeah.
We never lose sight of that because there are no networks, there's no safety net in place for Black men. None. So when we talk about this emotional labor and the dimension of it that applies to the society, we see it all the time.
Right.
We just don't process it that way, but we do know ain't nobody, providing any kind of labor for us.
Man, Doc, you hit something there. So, okay, guys. So men have a tax burden that pays for us and the women and children in the society. Women basically pay less taxes than they're worth because the jobs they do really don't provide that sort of tax burden. They don't carry their own tax burden. There's the issue going on in South Korea right now. You got a bunch of florists and whatnot, and they need they're running out of money over there because these women are basically a burden on the system. So, and if I can, Doc, and I'm gonna say what you said in my way, my terms. Basically, the doctor's saying they tax men, they tax the hell out of us, so that they can afford welfare, EBT cards. What else is stuff? What Section 8 and all this other stuff. So women know if everything goes to hell in a handbasket, they're still going to be all right. So that provides you some that provides you some emotional comfort that you know that you'll never be out on the street. Matter of fact, more than likely, nobody will ever let a woman be on the street in a cold storm. If she's a woman, older, younger, somebody's going to pick her up. But the government taxes men so that you don't have to worry about that. Look, that is the emotional load, and it's literally coming out of our pockets. That is, it's literally something you can quantify.
And I want to ask you to include this because you have intimate knowledge of it. Talk about the role that family court plays in emotional labor.
Oh my. Well, women pretty much know when they walk in family court, they have an advantage, and more likely than not, they're going to win. And they're going to pretty much get what they're going to, so they can have a child out of wedlock, knowing that if they got a man who has a few dollars in his pocket, they're going to get that support from him. And on top of that, they're more likely than not going to get their children. So they don't have the issues with having children these days that men have, because they get a chance to keep the children. As far as family court, I mean, I would love to be able to walk into court every time I go and know that I'm going to win. It's like having contributed $10,000 or $15,000 to the judge, and all the jury looks like you. The DA or whoever opposing counsel is your golfing buddy. Y'all went to college together. That's how women should feel when they go to family court.
Yes.
You see, and what does that do now on the flip side? How do men feel when they go to family court? A family court that they more than likely paid for with their tax dollars. Think about it. Yeah.
I mean, it's you can tell how biased it is because when you hear about a man actually winning a positive judgment, they're surprised.
Right.
He's surprised, let alone anybody else that hears about it. And you know who's more surprised than anybody? You ever see those videos where it happens? You look at her face.
Oh yeah.
When she lost, he
gets possession of the children. That's almost unheard of.
Oh man.
You know? Yeah. It's just or she gets convicted for domestic violence. As violent as, well, I don't want to say that because YouTube is funky, but we know that it's not a one-way street. And in fact, there's some studies that say it's the lovely ladies doing more of it than the men. It's just the women. And so now
they initiate first more often than not. They use weapons more often than not. And I would argue that many go into it with a kind of entitlement because we've not grown up in a culture where we've seen women held accountable by law for their physical relations with other people in terms of what they physically do to other folks, particularly men. We've not grown up in a culture where we've seen them collectively held accountable, but we've seen men be collectively held accountable. And now with the advent of Me Too, there's now a push where men are now sexually accountable in a way they've never had to be. And there are arguments on both sides of the line as far as that. But here's the thing. We've never seen women held accountable for their sexual behavior in the same kind of way. So it's interesting to see how these one-sided dynamics play out.
Yeah. I mean, well, Doc, I think the first step in what we're doing is laying this out so men can understand. And I think that's the benefit of social media. You can have a doctor on the East Coast talking to a lawyer down south, both black men, both fathers with the same experiences, comparing notes, not only their life experiences, but also using their education, to kind of hash this out so folks can really understand. This is a conversation that, between you and I that couldn't be public 25 years ago. And so,
man, if I'd have heard this 25 years ago, I might be where you are, man. You figured out the game much earlier than
Hey man, I'll be 48 this year, so I'm just now figuring it out. Yeah, so but yeah, shout out. Look, Dr. Ron O'Neill's here. Shout out to Dr. Neil.
That's right. What's up, Doc? Good to have you in here, man.
Yeah, man. So what do we do going forward, Doc? I mean, how do we? Because what do we do here? What do we do with this information? How do we package it and give it to men so that they can use it in their lives? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we have to push, and it will be uncomfortable, but actually push men to not only take stock, but to find value in themselves. And we also now addressing that individually, but also in a collective fashion. Can we actually do the same as a collective? Can Black men be a resource to Black men?
Okay.
It's a question that has to be asked because, as I said earlier, there's no safety net for us.
Right.
At all. So, is there a way that can happen? Can I call Attorney Spurling and get legal advice about a situation? Can he call me and say, I need help with a paper or whatever? I mean, is there a dynamic where, or even it can be even something a little more subtle than that? Can I call you and say, hey man, I'm having some trouble trying to understand what exactly is going on with my relationships. Can you give me some insight from your own experiences? Or does it have to remain some type of competition? The point I'm trying to get to is I want brothers to take stock, actually see the value that they bring to the table, prioritize their own health and well-being, and not just physical health. Because some of us can be in the gym and that is great, but when you start talking about other types of health, other types of healing, other types of taking care of ourselves, we look at you blankly because we don't necessarily know how to do that. Can we actually appreciate who we are, what we do, and do so individually and collectively? And I think if we can do that, it changes the political conversation we're having. So, because that's what we've been doing on my channel. We've been doing in different sections of YouTube for the last couple of years. We created the Black male political agenda. Now I'm 47 myself. I'll be 48 this year as well. In my lifetime, I have never seen a political agenda that actually identifies the struggles, issues, and possible solutions for what Black men endure. Never seen it.
I don't think you ever will. I mean, I hate to say it like that, but I don't consider myself part of the manosphere because that's something that other folks invented. That they have a lock on that. I was a married man. I got kids. I'm about to get married again, so I don't fit some of the tenets. But there are some great concepts in there, and one of them has to do with female nature. They're not going to struggle like we struggle, Doc. They're not going to do, if you put women, and I'm a sexist. I'm going to be the chauvinist right now. All right. Tell me I'm lying, though. If women had to deal with the pressure that men have to deal with, they would all be under a bridge. I'm not talking about, I got to get up and I got to be at work at 8:30 and I got to work there till 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and come home and pick up the kids. No, you have got to jump off of this boat with 100 other men, and there are people shooting at you from the beach. And about 25% of you are going to die before you get to the water. Okay. And then after you finish fighting that war, you got to come home and work in a plant for about 12 hours a day, every day for the rest of your life. You might get cancer. You might have kids. You got to pay for those kids and the wife. She might divorce you. You might end up living in your car. There's so many things that can happen to you. Or you end up working in a coal mine. You know you're going to get black tar disease, but you still got to do it anyway. If women had to endure the physical trauma and labor, and here's another thing, you got to deal with men for the rest of your life, where there is always a slight chance of violence that can pop off anywhere. From the baseball field to the courtroom to the boardroom. I don't think women can deal with the stress that men can deal with. I don't think they're built for it. And so if we want to have a society, if we want to have a productive society, we're going to have to shelter women. We're going to have to do it, or otherwise they'll all be under the bridge. Men, we know we're going to end up under the bridge. It keeps the fire under your proverbial, butt, right? And so it's what keeps us going because there's no bottom there. If you have men who know that there's a safety net And Doc, I mean, shut me down, please. Tell me you're you're a misandrist. Please shut me down. But from what I've noticed, what I see is that women are not going to do it. They would rather roll over and die. Okay, they would rather they're not going to fight back like men. They're not going to struggle and suffer when it gets real hard. They're not going to do it. They're going to fall apart. It's not going to happen. That's why women have such a hard time when they go to prison. That's why they have a hard time when they're isolated, when they're alone. That's why you got so many women who are alone or on meds right now, because they're trying to live like men have been living, and it's not working out for them. Tell me I'm wrong. I want to be wrong in that, but I don't think women can handle the stress, and that's why society puts that safety net underneath them.
I'll put it to you this way, because I know you got to go, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. But I'll put it to you this way: the fact that we don't even have the prisons built. If we actually, because women get sentenced 65% less for the same crimes as men. If we actually held women to the same standard we hold men, we do not have the physical prisons in place to lock women up. So not only are they not ready for it, society is not ready for it. But look, counselor, I really appreciate you being here. I know you got a list of things to do, man. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Tell people before you go when they can catch your next show, when you broadcast, and if they haven't been there, how to get to your YouTube channel.
You can just type in Dennis Spurling Unfiltered, and I pop up. I got probably maybe 600 videos up. You can go through the catalog. I try to put a fresh one up every weekday. I've literally dedicated time out of my day to do this YouTube thing as long as I can. My schedule things happen. I had to drop out of my PhD program and get back to litigating cases, but because of this pandemic that we're in, I have a lot of time. I work from home. I've developed new ways to do it, and instead of just using this computer setup for Zoom work, and cases and whatnot, I'm able to do this broadcast. It's something I kind of stumbled across, but you guys can catch me midday. The brothers call me Uncle D. Other people call me the Blizzard King. They said, if winter is coming, I'm the Blizzard King. I'm ushering it in because, I preach a liberation doctrine to men. You are free. This world belongs to you. You're free to do whatever you want to do. As specifically Black men, you've given enough to this country. You've given enough to people. You've given enough to everybody. You're free now. And I want to see you enjoy your lives. I want you to figure out what it is God wants you to do and go do it. That's my thing. And I wish somebody had told me that long ago. And once you do that, and once you realize that you own yourself and no one owns you, if you then decide to come back to America and set up roots, marry a woman, whatever color she may be, black, white, I don't care. I just want you to find peace of mind and happiness. That's my main thing. Because see, here's the thing, Doc. It's important for me to look out for other Black men because I got to live next door to them. And what you don't want is an unhappy Black man, living next door to you or around you or dealing with your daughter or interacting with his kids, interacting with your kids at school. So it's incumbent upon all of us to try to teach brothers how to work these issues out. But yeah, you can find me at Dennis Spurling Unfiltered. I got it's like a frat house over there sometimes. Sometimes it's like a lion's den. I focus on talking to guys. Me and the guys, it's a great time over there, and I enjoy it. It's invigorating. We got Crips, Bloods, cops, robbers. We got drug dealers. We got lawyers. We got everybody. Everybody's on my page. Everybody's welcome, and everybody has input. So, you guys are welcome. Come to Dennis Spurling Unfiltered. And that's it, man.
Man.
Is in the house, baby.
That's right. I appreciate you coming up, man.
All right, Doc. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
So shout out to my guest for tonight, Brother Sarah and Attorney Dennis Spurling. I appreciate the dialogue. I hope you guys got something out of it. At the end of the day, man, I just want you to value yourselves because damn sure it's it's a very small chance that others are going to do it. So we need to do it for ourselves. And the reality is when you do it for yourself, you won't tolerate less from anybody else. Because at the end of the day, you good. whether somebody's standing with you, whether you got 10 people standing with you, or whether you're standing on your own. And every man knows that there's a time in life, a season, and there are multiple seasons, in fact, where you will have to stand on your own. But if you can develop contentment and happiness standing on your own, being at peace with yourself, you won't tolerate anything less than peace. And I'm not a relationship expert. It's not my lane, but I do want brothers to be able to find that space, because there's so many distractions in the community, outside the community, that really seek to make sure we don't find it. Whether, but at the end of the day, you can choose to do so. So y'all have a good night. I appreciate you supporting the Onyx Report. I look forward to putting up some more content very soon, and I will talk to y'all later. I am here to tell you, brothers, we are not criminals by birth, perennial rapists, incapable intellects, man-children, sperm donors, child support wellsprings, success objects, walking phalluses, ATM machines, lottery tickets, unintelligent henchmen, valueless assassins, pro bono mercenaries, unpaid bodyguards, interchangeable stepfathers, child discipline proxies, unpaid repairmen, workhorses, emotional tampons, or any other socially accepted dehumanizing stereotype. We are thinkers, inventors, innovators, leaders, fathers, and men. Embrace your humanity, know your worth, and extend your time, attention, and resources only to those who genuinely respect you. And remember, your worth is not defined by meeting other people's narcissistic and selfish and unrealistic needs. You define your worth. Peace.